2 days ago, the news broke that Peter Thiel is relocating his entire family to Argentina. And that sparked an idea, which became a script, which I am now reading to you. I will get to him moving to Argentina at the end of this, but to start with, this episode is about the philosophy of government. So let me start with 3 definitions. Conservatism is the belief that a stable society needs a shared moral foundation, that tradition, religion, and community norms should shape law and government, and that the state has a legitimate role in upholding that moral order. Order comes first. The conservative claim is that liberty is not self-sustaining, it depends on a moral and institutional inheritance, again, family, religion, nation, and custom, that no individual invented and no individual is free to discard. Freedom operates within that order, it doesn't precede it. The state is therefore not neutral. It has a legitimate role in defending the inherited framework against dissolution. Libertarianism says the opposite. Individuals should be free to define their own morality. No one, not even the state, has the right to impose values on anyone else. The only legitimate restriction is preventing harm to others. They call it the harm principle, or the non-aggression principle. The libertarian holds that liberty needs no moral consensus to justify it. The only legitimate constraint on one person is the equal freedom of another. There is no inherited order the state may enforce, because enforcing a moral order is just one group imposing its preferences through coercion. Order is supposed to emerge from free exchange, not be imposed from above. And then there's transhumanism, which is the most fringe of these ideas, at least it was. There are kind of 3 main ideas behind transhumanism. First, the biological human is not the final form of human. To treat the body as sacred is to stand in the way of evolution and profit. The second idea is that human limits are problems to solve, not boundaries to expect. Not limits like I can't bike, a certain distance and I should train, I should get better. When a transhumanist talks about limits, they mean aging, disease, cognitive ceilings, death itself. They believe that these are not fixed terms of existence. They think that those things are unsolved engineering challenges. They are a limit that you can remove. And because you can remove that limit, it has no claim to your respect, just because it's always been there. Thirdly, transhumanists believe that reason and technology are the tools of humanity's self-authorship. That's a very complicated way of basically saying what evolution did blindly, now we can do on purpose. Basically, transhumanism is the final stage of Enlightenment thinking. They say that the same minds that decoded biology can now rewrite it. For the first time, our species can take authorship over its own design. We can become God with technology. Now, each of these views treats technology different. Under conservatism, you treat technology the way you would treat war. Sometimes it's necessary, but you hold it at arm's length and use it with restraint because the goal is always to preserve human dignity. Under libertarianism, technology is the engine of shareholder value. It's a golden goose. It's a tool, and the man who masters that tool moves mountains. And under transhumanism, technology is how man kills the idea of God, in Nietzsche's phrase, and escapes the limits of his own flesh. Sickness, weakness, death, again, just roadblocks to pave over. That sounds dramatic, but what you think about AI, whatever you think about AI, that's actually what it's for. Think about it. If you replace a receptionist with AI, and the receptionist is the best early target for automation, if you replace a receptionist with AI, you've swapped a human being with all of their biological and emotional limits for a machine that never tires, never takes a break, never calls in sick, and never goes on vacation. It never makes a mistake if you believe the marketing. AI in itself is a small step. And notice here, it sits outside the human condition entirely, but the use of AI is the first step towards replacing biology with technology. If you believe the new class of celebrity investors, the future is one where everyone becomes a CEO. You automate an entire workforce with AI to work for you. So to keep up, the average person, who, let's be honest, is probably not going to be CEO material, will have to adapt, to augment, to embrace technology in an ever-escalating arms race of self-modification. For right now, we can only see job losses as a consequence of this, but the push for actual bioenhancement, while still fringe, does exist. Take Peter Thiel, the founder of Palantir. You'll hear about him and Palantir a lot this episode. He said, "I believe evolution is a true account of nature, but I think we should try to escape it or transcend it." He's also announced that he wants to live to be 120, and he's put money behind that conviction, $3.5 million to the Methuselah Foundation, whose stated mission is to make 90 the new 50 by 2030. He's funded the SENS Research Foundation, which chases therapies to reverse aging itself. Where someone like Bezos funds science, Thiel funds conviction. His interest in parabiosis, that is, transfusing young blood as an anti-aging treatment, drew headlines and ridicule. He's been linked to a human growth hormone and testosterone optimization idea, and he doesn't see any of this as fringe. He sees it as the early layers of a technology stack that will eventually make biological aging optional. Mr. Producer, who did you say was that other guy with the blood transfusion? Brian Johnson, another proponent of blood transfusion is a big thing, and that's another one of the more prominent examples of transhumanism. But over the last 5 years, tech heavyweights like Ann Wojcicki, Sam Altman, Vitaly Buterin, Elad Gil, Alexis Ohanian, they've all funded genome sequencing startups like Nucleus and Orchid. These companies sequence embryos so their parents can screen for traits like intelligence, athleticism, hair and eye color, height, the whole catalog. To put it plainly, the founder class is subsidizing designer babies. The only missing piece is to stick Neuralink into their heads, and then you have a new race of Ubermensch. As of September 2025, Neuralink had implanted its device in 12 patients after raising $650 million for their most recent fundraising cycle. And the results have been good. People with paralysis have moved cursors, played video games, been able to write, and they've built designs in CAD software using only their thoughts. But the company is scaling. Musk says Neuralink will begin high-volume production in 2026, with an almost fully automated surgery, threading the device through the membrane around the brain without even having to remove it. And then there's the darker subplot. The released Epstein emails document his interest in funding the development of androids with human-level intellect. He was in contact with David Hansen, the founder of Hansen Robotics, the man behind the lifelike robot Sophia, along with another UT Dallas professor, Thomas Riccio. Epstein also funneled money to AI researcher Ben Goertzel, helping him land major robotics AI grants in Hong Kong in the 2010s. A University of Tennessee professor, Itamar Errol, shared research with Epstein for years before leaving the university in 2021. While there, he taught AI and machine learning and quietly fed some of his work into the Epstein-backed project. By March of 2010, Errol and Goertzel had drafted a $3 million proposal for the Epstein Foundation to build what they called a beautiful female android with, their words, genius-level intellect and a gorgeous, realistic face. The proposal noted that the final design would be done collaboratively with Epstein himself, meaning he would have direct input into how the android looked and what it could do. Given the nature of the Epstein files, that's a hard thing to sit with, but the connections are documented and they are widely reported. The proposal itself is on the public record. The feasibility is murky, the motives are worse. There is no version of this where we can be optimistic about that technology or confident that it would serve any social good. That is exactly the point. This is transhumanism. This is the attempt to overcome the limits of human biology, both physical and moral, with technology. My argument here is that the granular issue of technology is a smoking gun. It's the evidence that the Republican Party proper is converting Americans' hunger for nationalism into the advancement of libertarian transhumanism to the detriment of American interests. Start in 2016. Trump's first campaign was fiercely patriotic, proto-nationalist even, though most of his supporters were careful to keep their distance from the word nationalism. But MAGA, at its core, was nationalist. The packaging was unmistakably conservative. Restore, protect, defend. Again. This agenda drew the base. The agenda that drew the base was about preserving an order felt to be slipping. Borders, judges, religious liberty. They remembered America and they wanted it back. Even then, it wasn't doctrinally pure. The trade protectionism and the promise to shield entitlements were heterodox, but the grammar was conservative. It spoke the language of preservation. The 2020 campaign kept that rhetoric, amplified it even, but the actual governing has since been something else entirely. Since his re-election in 2024, there's been a tight-knit network that I will call the founder class. Those are the investors and venture capitalists who either helped to build the techno-industrial complex or champion the late-stage technologies that we would call here transhumanist. And they have names like Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, Elon Musk, David Sachs, Ben Horowitz, Ann Wachitsky, Sam Altman, Jeff Bezos, Kevin O'Leary, and more. We celebrate these people as great American entrepreneurs. They are also the strongest proponents of transhumanism. They are techno-futurists. Mark Andreessen wrote the book called The Techno-Optimist Manifesto, a document that at its heart is accelerationist and transhumanist. Andreessen Horowitz, the firm that Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz built, has deep ties to Israeli tech, and I'd argue to the Israeli government, because those two can never be separated. And you'll find this pattern across these names, a tightly spun web connecting founders, our government, and the Israeli government. A web that I'll argue runs straight into the war in Iran, but we'll get there. Thiel's life extension funding and his biblical defense of transcending death, Musk's Neuralink and Mars, the broader current running through the people now staffing science and AI policy, that is the stated worldview of the network that supplies the recent Trump administration's vision. The techno-futurist vision is shot through with venture capitalists pushing for freer markets and faster innovation. That is libertarianism made manifest. And the techno-industrial complex, sometimes called little tech for some reason, is enormous. It's also a clean, unspoken tool for consolidating state power through crisis. Look at Palantir, at Amazon, and yes, at AI firms like Anthropic's Claude, in theaters like Iran and in Venezuela. The consequences of how transhumanism don't require anyone to sign up for transhumanism are understated. An AI framework designed to give workers superpowers and to clear every barrier to development, paired with deregulated biotech and brain-computer interfaces, reshapes the population's relationship to work and cognition and to the body, whether or not the population chooses it. These innovators have made the wager that you don't need a transhumanist electorate. You don't need people to vote for transhumanism on the ballot. You just need transhumanist infrastructure, and the rest follows. Just like you don't need people to vote for nuclear proliferation, you just need the threat of the other country having nukes, and it follows that you have them yourself. How does this reach into the government? Let's start with the easy connections. J.D. Vance is a former employee of Thiel Capital. His path to the vice presidency was bankrolled by Thiel, Sachs, Musk, and Andreessen, every one of whom profits from the expansion of AI and tech. Thiel's company Palantir was incubated by the CIA back in 2003. It's grown into a massive AI-powered database that law enforcement and the military use to augment or replace human strategy and reconnaissance. And that brings us to one of the very darkest moments of this war. On February 28, 2026, the United States struck an elementary school in Minab, Iran on the first day of the war. The strike killed roughly 156 civilians, including around 120 school children, most of them young girls. It is among the deadliest civilian tragedies of the entire conflict. Reportedly, Palantir's Maven system pulls together radar, satellite, and drone imagery and intercepted communications into a single common operating picture of the battlefield. Then, it helps choose which unit strikes which target. According to a preliminary assessment by U.S. Central Command of the incident, U.S. intelligence maps failed to show that the school, once part of a military base, had long since been converted to civilian use. It had been added to an AI-generated target list without adequate human oversight. Sit with that. A target list generated by AI, with not enough humans in the loop to fact-check it, and the result is 120 girls dead. And then there's Doge. Elon Musk famously ran the Department of Government Efficiency, slashing budgets, cutting waste, streamlining the bureaucracy. These are all good things on their face, but what gets discussed less is that as Doge took a blade to each department, it also rewired those departments' data through back doors back towards Palantir's databases. Wired magazine reported that Palantir, once again Peter Thiel's company, was a part of Doge's effort to build a new mega API for accessing IRS records. It lines up with an executive order from Trump directing agencies to eliminate information silos. The stated goal was fighting fraud and waste, but consolidating every American's sensitive data in one place carries an obvious risk, and the Government Accountability Office is already probing how Doge handled sensitive data across the Treasury, Labor, Education, Homeland Security, and Health and Human Services departments. Jeff Bezos clashed with Trump during his first term. He bought the Washington Post and he stamped it with the slogan, "Democracy dies in darkness." But a few years later, he was a guest of honor at Trump's second inauguration, and Amazon donated $1 million to the inaugural committee. Kevin O'Leary, you may know him as Mr. Wonderful from the hit show Shark Tank, has turned up in the techno-industrialist ring as well. He's been pushing forward the Stratos project, a proposed 40,000-acre data center in Utah that would burn through more than twice the electricity of the entire state. He's another founder betting big on pushing the technological envelope forward. And you get the picture. In 2016, Trump's circle was the anti-media crowd. His war was fought against the press, but the media torched its own credibility with COVID, so the new frontier for Trump is business and technology, and his cabinet are all transhumanists. You probably remember the announcement, Trump declaring that America would invest $500 billion in AR infrastructure.
So my first day back from having a nice life, it's my honor to welcome three of the world's leading technology CEOs. And in the case of Larry Ellison, it's well beyond technology. He's sort of CEO of everything. He's an amazing man, an amazing business person. But to announce the largest AI infrastructure project by far in history, and it's all taking place right here in America.
Flanked by Sam Altman, Larry Ellison, and Masayoshi Son, this was the moment that the new reality landed for me personally. This administration wasn't really going to be taking back the soul of America, it was going to be about chasing a new horizon. I remember how strange it felt because I'd been expecting news on the TikTok settlement that day. Its fate had been the great cliffhanger of the week. Instead, Trump walked out and delivered a staggering endorsement of big tech. From that point on, the administration had been accelerating towards a techno-industrialist future. Think back to that second inauguration and try to remember how many guests were unlikely. Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, Mark Zuckerberg, fresh off the congressional hot seat over his handling of Facebook, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Sam Altman, the list runs on. One of the oldest attacks on Republicans is that they're in bed with big business. But from 2016 to 2020, that attack seemed antiquated. The first term of President Trump wasn't about big business, it was about American interests. Every time that someone at the New Yorker or the New York Times or some silly intellectual Democrat tried to complain about Republicans being in bed with big business, it didn't land. Historically, big business cozying up to Republican leaders was a symptom of neoconservatism. When Trump was an outsider, when he was the outsider, taking on the neoconservative establishment like he was during his first term, that wasn't an issue. But neoconservatism seems to have reinvented itself. Instead of the old defense giants like Raytheon, Boeing, Honeywell, which are all still around, it has retooled itself to court the modern capitalist. The founder is the new defense contractor. Remember how the crisis of 9/11 paved the way for the Patriot Act and the War on Terror. Those two things are almost universally despised now, but in the moment, the public certainly backed them. That's how a crisis works. And it seems that some people in the government understand that a crisis is the most efficient engine for a sweeping reform. If you are over 30, this probably won't go down easily, but at the very least, some elements of our government had advanced knowledge of the attacks on the World Trade Center, and they let it happen because it was convenient for policy goals in the Middle East and convenient for economic goals at home, specifically helping everyone forget a $2.3 trillion hole in the Pentagon's books. The pattern repeats itself now with the Epstein files implicating leaders across the government and the existing appetite to drain the swamp. We've essentially seen another crisis-fueled switcheroo. The Epstein and the swamp are being used to consolidate the techno-industrial complex, the military, and the government personnel into one structure. The Palantir databases are the spiritual successor to the Patriot Act. This new Republican coalition is not conservative in any traditional sense. Truly, it is libertarian. Libertarianism is fundamentally opposed to any orthodox moral framework. It's a vision of a free market, opposed to universal moral standards, opposed to any duty of government to defend scripture or tradition over human life. It is philosophically unrestrained. It is the wild jackass of economic theories. The people around the president, the people steering America right now, are techno-industrialists at best and transhumanists at worst. And remember what transhumanism really is: the willing sacrifice of humanity's sacred image on the altar of human imagination, or more plainly, the enhancement of the human condition through technology. Trump's leadership has changed since the first term. He seems at last to have become part of the machine. Nowhere does this new paradigm show itself more clearly than the war in Iran. It is an opportunity for big tech to stretch its legs and sharpen its teeth. The war began on the premise that Iran was weeks away from a nuclear weapon. Let me play you a montage of Bibi Netanyahu saying that exact thing going back to 1995.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months.
They have the wherewithal, the stored up, preserved knowledge to make a bomb very quickly if they wanted to do it.
Iran is so dangerous. Weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
They're very close. They're 6 months away from being about 90% of having the enriched uranium for an atom bomb.
Iran is gearing up to produce 25 bombs, atomic bombs a year, 250 bombs in a decade.
Ladies and gentlemen, time is running out.
Iran will be capable of producing alone, without importing anything, nuclear bombs within 3 to 5 years.
For decades, and especially since the War on Terror, our closest ally has had a vested interest in toppling Tehran and installing a puppet government. That came to a head last year when we bombed Iran's nuclear facilities with Israeli support. In the president's words, completely and totally obliterated.
Thank you very much. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
1 year later, we launched the largest operation since the War on Terror, again alongside Israel. It started over the crackdown on Iran's anti-government protests, and then the objective shifted to nuclear weapons, and then to the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz. And through it all, the military situation appears deadlocked. Israel has no intention of letting that regime survive, and the president has tried more than once to de-escalate, but that's a long shot. But set geopolitics to the side. The war in Iran is functioning as a proving ground for the techno-industrial complex. Palantir gets most of the coverage, but the list doesn't stop there. The Department of Defense expanded its classified intelligence networks in a major deal with 7 tech companies: Google, Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, OpenAI, NVIDIA, SpaceX, and Reflection. They provide the systems for data synthesis, situational awareness, and combat decision-making. American drones run on Starlink communications. Iran has started hitting back at American tech infrastructure across the region and announced that it's now fighting on the digital front as well as on the ground. This is the moment the techno-industrial complex takes its seat right next to the older military-industrial complex as the next great institution of American neoconservative power. Nancy Pelosi's stock portfolio reflects that. So do plenty of portfolios in Washington, held by people with a vested interest in keeping the wheels of democracy greased with the blood of innocents. Let me be clear, I am not a pacifist. I'm not anti-war on principle. I am against wars of choice, fought largely or entirely at the behest of a foreign nation. And I'm against advancing technology at the expense of human dignity. The human image is sacred. That is not and never will be negotiable. The power of technology is to help human beings. The danger of technology is that it reshapes them. This matters today. It matters more tomorrow. Technology will not stop advancing on its own. Founders will not refuse to make money, and politicians will never surrender the power that technology hands them. So, let's talk about the future. Peter Thiel made headlines just days ago. He's moved his family out of America, and he's bought a mansion in Buenos Aires, and has been welcomed by Argentina's president, Javier Milei, a noted libertarian, by the way. He's only the latest techno-industrialist to hedge his bets outside of this country. The reporting calls it a temporary move, but the direction is unmistakable, and he's not alone. Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn and an early investor in OpenAI, is the one who named the phenomenon. He told The New Yorker that among the ultra-wealthy, buying a house in New Zealand has become code for apocalypse insurance. Quote, kind of a wink-wink, he said, say no more, unquote. He even put a number on it. He figures more than half of the tech billionaires will have a place to escape to. The fear in his telling is that AI-driven job loss will make people turn on the faces behind the technology. Larry Page, Google's co-founder, got residency in New Zealand and has been spending serious time in Fiji, relocating his center of gravity to the Pacific while staying a principal in the AI race. Mark Zuckerberg built a $100 million compound in Hawaii, complete with a guard tower and a large underground structure that looks like a bunker, but he insists is just a basement. And Larry Ellison, Oracle's co-founder, one of the 3 men standing beside Trump at his STARGATE announcement, owns 98% of the Hawaiian island of Lanai. This is the closest thing on this list to a private sovereign refuge. The writer Douglas Rushkoff interviewed several of these men for his book Survival of the Richest, and he put the diagnosis bluntly. The richest people in the world are obsessed with the moment that their own technology triggers mass job loss and social collapse, and the bunkers and the guarded compounds exist to keep out, in their words, the angry poor people when, again in their words, shit hits the fan. So here's what we're left with. An identifiable, overlapping set of the people most responsible for accelerating AI and the technological transformation of this country have, with real money, bought themselves the ability to exit, geographically or behind walls. If it all goes badly, by their own revealed preferences, They are far less confident in the outcome than their public optimism would suggest. America is their chessboard. What happens here will be massively consequential for the rest of human history. The people on the inside, however, are becoming increasingly bearish about the future of this nation, specifically in regards to their application of transhumanism. They are eager to move the pieces on the board, but they wish to remain at arm's length from the consequences. That should concern anyone with a brain. Thanks for listening.